Hello, this is Ashley Cope. Today I am going over my counselor advocacy exploration assignment for Multicultural Counseling CHD 5013. First, here we have helping seeking behaviors of diverse clients. Um, in column A, we have why some people seek help. One, I chose life-changing events such as divorce, death, marital issues. The cultures that seek help in this event would be Americans or European Americans. Two, experiencing new feelings or emotions. Cultures will be Americans. Three, need someone to talk to. Cultures will be Americans. Experiencing trauma. Cultures will be Americans or European Americans. Life stressors. Cultures will be African Americans or European Americans. In column B, I have why some people may not seek help or barriers as to why they choose not to seek counseling. Client distrust or fears. That would be African Americans, Americans, or Asian Americans. Lack of counselor cultural knowledge. Chinese, Americans, African Americans, or Asian Americans. Stigmas. African Americans or Asian Americans. Racial identity development, African American or Asian Americans, and language barrier, Hispanics or Asian Americans. C, 5 strategies counselors can employ to remediate or reduce clients' reasons or barriers for not seeking help. I have counselor self-awareness, which would be knowledge and skills. As a counselor, if you are self-aware, you are more likely to be aware of other cultures, therefore you would reduce their barriers. A client worldview, with attitudes and beliefs. This means that you see things outside of your world. You see how things can affect other cultures, not just yourself. Counseling relationship. This strategy is important to reduce clients' barriers. Therefore, if they're able to trust you, they would feel more welcome, to come and speak with you. Counseling interventions. You have to make sure you're using the correct intervention that would go with the situation. Otherwise, the client may just feel as if you're not hearing them or you don't really care about their issue. Challenging the social stigma of counseling. I think that we need to bring more awareness to counseling. There's such a strong stigma attached to it that it's always negative, or if you seek counseling, you think your life's over. We need to have a more positive outlook on the world of counseling. The sources that I utilized here were journal articles from Multicultural Counseling and Psychotherapy, and then psychological factors that inhibit seeking help. Section 2, this really ticks me off. Which multicultural diverse client population would you be interested in advocating for, whom have been oppressed and or discriminated against? The culture that I chose was Hispanics. I feel as if this population or culture is growing rapidly in the United States, and that if that is the case, they do need counselors who will advocate for them. Hispanics do face major language barriers and do not feel as if they are understood in this country, and that hinders them from seeking help or returning to counseling if they are brave enough to go the first time. Describe the difference between intentional and unintentional oppression and discrimination. Give an example of each, intentional and unintentional oppression and discrimination that this population has experienced. To me, intentional oppression and discrimination is a direct act that is forced upon a person directly based upon their skin color, age, gender, sexuality, or ethnicity. The person completing the act is fully aware of their malicious behaviors and motive behind their act. An example would be refusing to provide therapy to a Hispanic because you're African American and you're not bilingual. Just because they're Hispanic doesn't necessarily mean that they speak a different language than you. So we need to be mindful of what language they speak and not just trying to get rid of that client simply because they're different. If they do speak a different language, we could always get a translator. Unintentional oppression and discrimination is an indirect act that is forced upon a person without intent, typically accidental, without knowledge of the harm that's being caused. An example of this would be speaking extremely loud to an elderly person, just assuming that they cannot hear because of their age. Just because they're old doesn't mean that they're deaf. C, what are some stereotypes that this client population have been labeled with? What are some potential impacts of these stereotypes on the population? The first one I have is assuming a person can speak Spanish just because they're Hispanic. Referring a potential client to a therapist who can speak Spanish just because you assume that they speak Spanish. Again, as I stated previously, just because they're Hispanic doesn't mean that they speak Spanish. Assuming Hispanics are illegal immigrants. This could put a strain on the relationship by assuming a Hispanic person is an illegal immigrant. Just because they're Hispanic doesn't mean that they can't be a U.S. citizen. Assuming Hispanics are all from Mexico. This is an indirect discrimination example. Just because a person is Hispanic doesn't mean that they were born in Mexico. Most of the newer generation Hispanic culture are actually born here in America. You know, their parents came from Mexico and they were born here, which would make them U.S. citizens, which ties back to the second example. What are some barriers that this client population faces, and what are some potential impacts of these barriers on the population? Language is the biggest barrier and most difficult obstacle that this client population will face. The article informs us that Hispanics use more colorful words and expressive adjectives than most cultures and have a difficult time understanding things that aren't in the way that they speak. As Americans, we just are simple, straight and to the point. Hispanics use more expressive adjectives, therefore giving them a clearer picture of things. Hispanics seem to have a different culture and view of the family's overall mental health as more important than just the individual. From the outside looking in, Hispanics want us to view the overall family more so than the individual's mental health. They do not really believe in the importance of self-care. Hispanics by nature are also less confrontational than other cultures, so therefore as a therapist we have to be cautious and aware of this when helping them through issues. If we're asking a Hispanic person to confront someone that they have a problem with, this may cause them to shut down or get uncomfortable because they are by nature more passive and subtle. How might prejudice affect and reinforce the self-esteem of this client population in the community in which they live? Coming to America, a lot of Hispanic groups are viewed as non-taxpayers who just come to America for cheap work. Another prejudice that cultures may have against Hispanics are gang-related ideas. If we feed into these prejudices, we just reinforce their beliefs and self-consciousness about being a minority. Discuss some strategies that counselors can utilize to empower and advocate for this client population. I believe that awareness is key in most situations, just as being related to the gangs. Just because they're Hispanic doesn't mean that they're in a gang or have any gang affiliation. Typically, people tend to shy away from things that they are unsure about, so if we advocate for awareness of the Hispanic group, people would have more insight and therefore they would be more accepted and appreciated. Describe some specific tools and resources that you might provide for this client population for empowerment and self-advocacy, self-awareness workshops, translators, and connections to the community. And right there are the two sources that I utilized, journal articles, Culture and Counseling, New Approaches, and Multicultural Counseling and Psychotherapy. Okay, and now I will show you my flyer. Here's the advocacy and awareness for Hispanic culture. The characteristics population in the United States has reached 58 million in 2016. They're the second largest racial group behind whites. 37 million Hispanics ages 5 and older speak Spanish at home who are also proficient in English. The overall need, I believe, is their health care due to their large language barrier, lack of insurance or income, different cultural beliefs, mistrust, illiteracy, or sometimes immigration status. They just do not seek health care as regularly as they should. Strategies for empowerment and life satisfaction would be linking them to population to educational training to overcome the language barriers, providing workshops to learn social skills, providing research classes for insurance benefits to meet health and mental health needs, providing educational resources for career trainings, and linking them with the Department of Social Services for a case manager in their area to find more beneficial programs. and there's the two sources that I used for that. Thank you.